Hello and welcome to a lecture on how to design and how to think through designing the avatar for your game. The game's avatar is probably your second most important part of your game, right behind the game world. It's a close second. It's also extremely important that you put a lot of thought into your avatar and who your player is controlling. A bad avatar can crumble an otherwise great game. And so we're going to get into why that is. But first, here's the goal. The goal is to create characters in your game, and I'm not just talking about the avatar here. I'm talking about all the characters in your game, even the non-playable characters. The goal is to create characters that are well drawn and or well described. Characters that people can relate to, that people like to look at, that have good color schemes and good facial expressions and all that, or at least are described well enough to fill in the imagination. Have a clear role. Create characters that are there for a reason, not just characters that aren't there for a reason. I got to be honest, in the early days of video games, it's okay to have a character wandering around a town who just said, "Hi, how are you doing?" Now, I've talked to enough of those characters that are a waste of time, and so you want characters that have a clear role. You want the player to know, why is this character even in the game to begin with? You want characters that are distinctive. If you don't know what that means, it just means characters that set your characters apart from all the other characters and all the other fictions in the world. You can draw from stereotypes. That's an okay thing to do. But you have to have something that's going to make your character, your avatar, different, distinctive. Something that makes people look at your character and think of your game, not think of any generic game or generic movie. You want characters that are credible and are relatable, meaning that you know, your character has to be believable. I have to be able to know someone like this in real life and relate to that person. The example that the book gave is that you don't an alien from outer space with tentacles shooting out of his face, who is angry and destroying the rest of the world, is not going to stop to give an orphan some ice cream, right? For that matter, neither is James Bond. Neither is James Bond the savior of the world. He's not going to stop and do that. And so it has to be credible. It has to be something we believe that they would do. Then most importantly, the two most important things at the bottom of that list there that you see is you want to create characters that the player wants to be and wants to control and wants to step into the shoes of. They're going to spend a lot of time with this character. They're going to spend a lot of time, more time than we've spent with Captain America, more time than I've spent with James Bond. Then so it's important that it's a character they want to be. And when you think of any given franchise, whether it's a video game, whether it's a movie, whether it's a TV show, what is the first thing you picture? It's the characters, with rare exceptions. When I think of Star Trek, I picture the Starship Enterprise, and yet that's good because the Enterprise itself is a character in that franchise, even though it's more of a what we would call a non-specific one. And so you want to put a lot of attention into creating your characters, a lot of detail, and a lot of thought into what is our avatar going to look like. To give you some examples of those last two, think about Lara Croft. Stephen Poole is a designer of some of the Tomb Raider games. That's a picture of sort of early PlayStation era Lara Croft right there. He said this about Lara Croft. She says, Lara Croft is attractive because of, not despite of, her glossy blankness. Beyond the bare facts of her biography, in the games we know very little about her. The movies tried to flesh some of that out, but in the games, at least the early games, you just knew almost nothing about her. So beyond that, he says, her perfect vacuity. If you don't know what that means, it just means a vacuum. It just means that she can sort of wear whatever you throw at her. It means we can make her into whoever we want her to be. And so if I'm a guy playing as Lara Croft in those games, it doesn't bother me at all that I'm playing as a woman because I can still make her and project my sort of masculinity on her. If I'm a woman in those games, same thing. And so Tomb Raider is a great example. Lara Croft is of something that I want to be with this person. I'm okay with the fact that there's very little about her because I, as the player, am projecting those things onto her. And to give you an example of that second point there, create a character that spearheads the franchise. that people is going to associate with my game, just look at this movie poster. Look at this movie. You know what movie this is a poster for, right? It's Avengers Endgame, right? But notice what's on the poster. Not a bunch of dust, right? A bunch of characters. I would bet 90% of the movie posters that were ever made have a character on them. Have a character that the people are going to represent. That the people who go see this movie, when they think of your movie, when they think of your video game that you're designing, they are going to think of your characters. So yeah, better design a good one, all that to say. So let's talk about how to design a good character. First of all, let's just define an avatar. You know what an avatar is. I don't know if you knew this other bit, though, is that it actually comes from the Hindu religion. That the Hindu gods who became flesh would call their human forms avatars in that mythology. Obviously, they didn't actually do that. Hindu's a fake, false religion. But the Hindu gods who became flesh would call their human form avatars. Very loosely, you know, I'm a Christian. We might be able to call Jesus the avatar of God. That is a word that is used in Colossians. He's the image of the invisible God. Imago in Greek has a lot in common with the Hindu word avatar. But that's religion. This is video games. It's just important to note that the term avatar was co-opted by the video game community to describe the characters that the player controls. And so I think it's a wonderful metaphor to use, a wonderful term to use, that this character that you're playing, this being that you're controlling on the screen, is an extension of yourself. That's what the word avatar means. It's not just something that's beyond you. It's something that we are inviting you to put yourself into and interact with the game through that thing. As the old Hindu gods in their mythology, it allowed the Hindu gods to interact with the world. That the same thing is true in video games, that you are allowed to interact with the world through the avatar. And so there's different types of avatars. One is a player-designed avatar. So there you go. That's from Skyrim. At the very beginning of Skyrim, they give you this interface. You can choose a race on the left. There's different races. That's the lizard race. There's also a cat race in the game. There's 3 or 4 elf races. And then there's 3 or 4 human races, which is crazy. A Breton, an Imperial, a Nord is a human. And then you can choose eye color. You can choose how big or small their nose is. You could choose skin color. You could just go crazy, and then you can name yourself down there. And so that's a player designed avatar. The nice thing about those games is that you just have to give the options, which doesn't take too much work, especially anymore in today's world. And then the player just sort of takes it from there, and they can find their own character. They can build their own character, which is kind of cool. And so the problem with those games is, if Skyrim doesn't have a good character to associate with this franchise, so you lose a little bit there. And you have to write a bunch of code for what if the player is a female. Then you have to write code that says he or she, depending on the gender they pick. You have to write different code for the race, which Skyrim had to do a bunch of. But that's a player-designed avatar. And then you have the not player-designed avatars. You have a specific and a non-specific. So a specific is a character that is very well defined, and so very well laid out. They have a specific appearance, but not just a specific appearance. They have a specific personality, a specific character arc, a specific place they're going. And then a non-specific is where the game gives you the design of the character, but the character doesn't talk. They don't have a character arc. They're just a form that the player is inhabiting and experiencing the game through. And so even though their appearance is specific, the actual character itself is amorphous. So think about that Lara Croft quote I just shared. Lara Croft is a non-specific, or she's somewhere on the non-specific side of the spectrum. And then you have you have other things in between. You have specifically non-specific, meaning that they are specific, and yet the player, gets to control some decisions that the character makes and guide some of the character's interactions. And then you have not that specific at all, which is kind of what Lara Croft would be. Mario and Link would be other ones. And so here's some types of characters. There's a player design. This is a guy from Half-Life. In the game, you never see his face. His face is on the cover of the game. But actually in the game, he's a non-specific avatar because you only see his hands. It's a first-person perspective. And so even though the designers of the game drew up his character, his look, in the game he never says anything. And the player controls 100% of his dialogue options, of his movements, of where he goes. So that's a non-specific avatar. Compare that to, say, Batman from the Arkham games. In fact, the Arkham games tagline is those 3 words, be the Batman. And so in Arkham games, Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, Arkham Knight, and then there's even one called Arkham Origins. It wasn't all that great. Batman is a specific avatar. He is specifically Batman. And you cannot kill people in the Batman games if you're playing as Batman, because the one thing it means to be Batman is Batman that shall not kill nothing, nobody. And so that's something they take control of. The dialogue options are off the table. Batman says what Batman says. Batman talks in the game, and it is Kevin Conroy's voice, which is the voice of the animated Batman. And so you get some choice. But you don't get any choice in the actual character. They are open world games. You can decide where to go and what to do and what order to do it. But the actual character itself is very specific. And then we have our in-between. And so Half-Life, he's nameless, faceless. He's just sort of off the screen. And the only reason we know what he looks like is because of the box of the game. And then Batman is Batman. And he's Batman. He acts like Batman. He talks like Batman. And the player can't change that at all. But you have things between the two, like Metroid Prime. This is Metroid from Metroid Prime. And one of the crazy things about her and why I bring her up is nobody knew that she was actually a female character until 3 games in. They kind of surprised everybody when the game designers came out and said, oh yeah, we always intended her to be female. This was always a woman traveling through space. Her name's Ridley. And she's based heavily off of the Alien franchise from the movies. And so, yeah, they came out and said, yeah, she's a woman, but, and as a woman, she has specific personality. In the game, she moves in a certain way. It's not a first-person perspective, and so she does have character. She does have slightly specific attributes, and yet at the same time, she still never talks, at least in the early games. In some of the later games, they gave her dialogue. The story still says things about her, gives us details about her, and so she is sort of a specifically non-specific avatar. There are specific things about her. It's not like a player designed where you could be whatever gender you want to be. She has a gender, and she acts in that gender, and she has a goal, and she acts in that goal. Compare that to Link. Link is also non-specifically specific. Link in the games never talks. The players get to decide what he says, and yet the kid, in the early games, he's a kid, has tons of personality. He has so much personality, and it's through his little grunts and his little whenever he jumps, and his like hi-ya as every time he slashes his sword, and just the way he moves, he sort of bounces like a kid would bounce. I've noticed when my kids move, they bounce. I'm old now, I don't bounce as much as I used to, and so he's very bouncy. And look at his eyes, big eyes. There's sort of like childlike wonder in them, and so and he's an elf, and so he's not specifically defined like Batman is, and yet there are things that are specific about him, and then there's non-specific things that the player can read into him. And so those are some examples of those sort of tiers. Is you have specific, like Batman, who's always going to be Batman, always going to do what Batman does, very much living in a Batman world. Then you have Half-Life, where he could be anybody or anybody, and then you have the things in between. So with that said, here's some things to consider as you go about designing your avatar. One is, the top one, your player will be with your avatar for hours and close to 100% of the game time. We're going to come back to that here in a few minutes, but that's a huge consideration. This isn't a 40-minute TV show with 9 characters. If your avatar is unlikable, your players won't play your game for very long. It's hard to put up with somebody who's insufferable. So you probably have someone in your life who annoys you to death, and you like can't wait to leave the room every time they walk in. Don't make your avatar like that. Another consideration is both men and women play video games. We have found that overly masculine avatars, women don't play those games long, and the same thing is true for overly effeminate women avatars. Men don't play them long. Lara Croft works because she's kind of a woman, but in a man's world. She acts like a woman, but she's doing things that men enjoy doing, and so both men and women play the Tomb Raider games and enjoy those games. But when it comes to like Batman, not many women play Batman. He's just too much of a man, right? And so you have to keep that in mind as you design your game. Keep in mind that first person and third person make a huge difference in how the avatar is perceived. And so think about Half-Life. Half-Life is a first person game. That's why you never see the character. That's why you never see the avatar. Whereas if it was third person, you'd be looking at them all the time. Link is a third person game. Zelda is a third person game. You're looking at that avatar all the time, and that makes a huge difference in how the avatar is perceived. And so I already said this, but avoid avatars who discuss the players. But I want to give you an example of that, and that's Squall. From Final Fantasy VIII. This is actually the example the book gave. I actually like Final Fantasy VIII. In the Final Fantasy series, he's one of the more divisive characters, meaning a lot of us really like him and a lot of us really don't. But for the first 10 to 20 hours of the game, he is kind of annoying. He's just moody, and he doesn't have much of a personality at all. And you can see it in this picture I'm showing you right here. There's just not much to him. He's sort of, people ask him questions and he just won't answer them. He's kind of distant and attached, but it led to a lot of players feeling distant and attached from the game itself, which when you feel distant and detached from a game, then what do? You turn it off. And so many people didn't get to the point where he opened up. And in the last half of the game, he's really a great character. He grows a lot and he changes a lot. And I think he even comes around and laughs maybe once. And so he actually has a really good character arc, but if it takes you 30 hours to get there, most people don't have the patience for that and are like, I'm tired of acting like I'm this idiot guy who's a jerk. I'm going to go play another game that's more fun, like Link, where the little kid's hopping around and making me feel like I'm a bouncy little kid again, right? And so yeah, I mean, this is not a guy you want to spend 30 hours with. So keep that in mind. As you go to design your character with those considerations in mind, that you know that your player is going to spend a lot of time with this character, that men and women perceive characters and avatars differently and play different games. With all that in mind, now let's talk about how to actually design your character, the actual process of designing your character. There are two ways to do this. One is, and your personality type is going to dictate which one you do. I'm definitely a 2 here, not a 1. But some people are just going to sit down with a blank piece of paper and draw the character. And they're sort of going to discover the character as they draw it. And that's going to lead to avatars that aren't going to change much throughout the game. So you guys know Pac-Man was definitely a art-driven character, art-driven avatar. Just the design of Pac-Man, you know, the art, the look of it is what drove that, and that's fine because Pac-Man doesn't change at all throughout the game. He just walks around eating things. But if I'm going to have a character in my game who's 3-dimensional, who is multi-dimensional, who has depths to them, who cries sometimes and laughs sometimes, who has strong opinions about things, but then those strong opinions can change over time, much like Squall in the previous picture, then I'm going to want to be a character-driven. So instead of sitting down with a blank canvas here, I'm sitting down with a notebook, and I'm explaining the character's attributes, I'm mapping out their character arc, how they're going to change, mapping their personality, and then usually character-driven people like me hand it off to an art-driven person to draw. All designers, of course, use both, right? But most stick with one starting point. And so I'm going to stick with a character-driven, whereas other people are going to stick with art-driven. Both are good. Both are great. It's just art-driven works if the character isn't going to change throughout the game. If they're going to change, then you probably want to start with how they're going to change and let that define how you draw them. And so then you have to decide the physical type. Is your avatar going to be humanoid? Is it going to look and act like a human? Not is it going to be a human. Notice, clear back on the Skyrim slide, the lizard was still humanoid. It still had 2 arms, 2 legs. It still had human facial expressions. It still had eyes that looked like human eyes. Even though it looked like a lizard, it also looked like a human. Then you have non-humanoid. Which is the avatar shaped like a machine or a vehicle. So is your avatar going to be a car that the character drives? And if so, how are you going to define that car's personality? Nobody wants to drive a generic car around Las Vegas, even if it's racing. I don't want to race a generic car. I want to race a car that has personality, a car that has fun colors, a car that whose headlights almost make it look like it's glinting, right? Or what's the word I'm looking for? Frowning, right? A car that's sort of, nobody wants to drive a generic Buick around a city or even race it. So even if it's non-humanoid, you still have to draw it to resemble something like a human. And then you can have a hybrid, of course. You can have a humanoid that is a robot, or a robot that is a humanoid, or a car that has a mouth. Think Lightning McQueen in the Cars movies. And then you have to decide, am I going to draw this realistically as a human, or if I'm going to draw it as a cartoon? Cartoons have one big difference between realistic people, and that is cartoons have one adjective that drives the appearance. And so if I'm going to draw a cool character as a cartoon, I'm going to have certain features that just make him look cool. I'm going to dress him in black, right? And a black colored sort of leather coat. And I'm going to draw his eyes more narrow instead of more wide. And he's going to have big eyebrows and probably darker hair. He's probably going to be leaning against something because leaning is so cool, right? If it's silly, then they're going to have big eyes and they're going to have almost no eyebrows, and their mouth is going to be kind of tiny, and they're going to have big ears, right? And their hair is going to be all over the place. So if it's going to be tough, the muscles are going to be exaggerated, that there's going to be no muscular, there's going to be no way this person actually is a human being because their muscles are going to be so big and their head's going to be so tiny, but their chest is going to be so broad, right? And so once again, cartoons are more of an art-driven approach. If your character is going to start being tough like Squall and he's going to end being sort of tender-hearted, you can't use a cartoon, right? You're going to want to draw that realistically. Let me give you an example from another Final Fantasy game, Cloud. In fact, as I go through these pictures on this video, go ahead and try to define them using these adjectives. Is it humanoid, non-humanoid, or hybrid? And is it realistic or cartoon? And if it is cartoon, what's the adjective that's driving the appearance? So here's Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. Obviously a cartoon. Obviously. What adjective do you think defines his appearance? He's cool, right? He's cool, especially if you go back to 1997 when this game came out. He's cool. And he's tough. Some sort of mix between cool and tough. You can see his exaggerated muscles, even in the polygonal shape from the 1997 game. You can see he has sort of the broad chest, and he has the spiky hair, and he's skinny, but he's still tough. He's still tough persona, right? Compare that to the 2020 remake of the game that just came out this year. Now, he's humanoid and he's not a cartoon. He's still tough. He still has the muscles. But notice they dressed him in sort of a black robe. Notice his face actually looks like a human face with human eyes. In this game, they're focusing a lot more on his character arc. In the old game, when he moved around very clunky, because tough guys move around clunky. This game, he moves around very majestically, poetically. He sort of floats through the game. And so they drew him as a humanoid because the remakes of this game are focusing on his character arc. He starts tough, but then he opens up and there's new depths to him. And so in the 1997, his appearance couldn't change. That was his appearance no matter what. Now they can change his appearance if he's more realistically drawn. But he is a humanoid through and through. That much is the same. He's not a hybrid. He's not non-humanoid. Compare that to C-3PO. C-3PO is not humanoid. There's not 2 eyes on C-3PO. There's that red light kind of resembles a nose, but so could be that little tube next to it. And so he doesn't have a mouth. He doesn't have 2 arms and 2 legs and shoulders. He's a robot through and through. Right? A cartoon robot, and he's kind of cartoon shaped, but drawing him cartoon shaped, or at least designing him sort of cartoon shaped, at least allowed us to make him shiny, right? And then his beeps actually add to his personality, and so there's ways to make non-humanoid avatars still kind of relatable to humans, right? I would drive R2-D2 around, and I'd probably have a lot of fun driving him around, right, in the Star Wars games. So compare him to his counterpart, C-3PO. C-3PO is a hybrid. He's a robot, but he is humanoid. He talks like a human. He has 2 eyes. He has facial expressions. He has arms. He has legs. He's humanoid, right? But he's still kind of cartoony. Then Mario. What is Mario? I'll just ask the question. What is Mario? Mario's a humanoid cartoon, right? And he's non-specific. He's a non-specific avatar. He's probably closer to Link, though, in being sort of specifically non-specific, in that he still has a personality. Your personality, if I'm sort of a somber person, and I'm playing Mario, Mario doesn't become somber, just like Link doesn't become somber. So there's a level where he's on the there's a little bit of specificness to him, but he's almost non-specific. But he is non-specific in that he doesn't talk much. He doesn't grow throughout the games. There's no character arc in Mario. He starts as being a goofy plumber who's incredibly acrobatic, and he ends by being a goofy plumber who's incredibly acrobatic, right? And then these are the cars from Rocket League. What are they? Yep, they're non-specific. They're non-humanoid cartoons. And yet they make the cars really small to make them look cute and kind of fun, and they make the ball look really big, and that creates some really fun things with the game. But yeah, the cars are non-specific. They don't have personalities. They're not going to grow and change throughout the game. They're just going to drive around and keep hitting this big, massive soccer ball, right? But they're fun. The way they move is very non-generic, right? I said earlier, nobody wants to drive generic cars around a fictional city or race them. These cars are not generic. They look cool. Each of them has a distinctive style. And I think you can actually design them, too, so they're player designed. So what is this? These are the Hydralisks from the game StarCraft. What are these? Well, if you don't know, that's okay, because they are humanoid. They still have 2 eyes and a mouth, and yet they're monstrous. And monsters are a special type of cartoon that sort of fit in their own category, but they are considered humanoid, if not a little bit of a hybrid. And so they still have eyes and a mouth. They still move distinctively, and yet they're designed to kind of scare you. And so there's some specificness to them. And so that's just some thoughts about how to, things to think through as you're designing your avatar. There's some other things you want to think about, which is what clothes and weapons are they going to use. I didn't put the picture of Cloud earlier with the big old sword he's known for. The big sword says more about his personality than any of his appearance does. And so clothing is important, including the color scheme of the clothes. If Cloud dresses in black, that says something about his personality. Remember I said earlier, black is cool. If the character is dressed in bright yellow or bright pink or neons, that says they're playful, they're fun, they're cute, they're bouncy. Distinctive names can help a lot. Cloud and Squall are distinctive names. If I tell you about Cloud, you immediately get an idea in your head of a character, right? If I tell you even the other characters in Final Fantasy VII, like Tifa. Tifa says something about our character. Barrett. Barrett's this big guy with a big chain gun, and he's muscular. Just the name Barrett says tough guy, right? Ethnicities. Hey, they can help, but be careful. Just be careful with ethnicities. Don't be racist is what I'm saying. And yet ethnicities can also help flesh out your avatar. Dialogue, how they talk, is reflective of their personality, as is giving them a theme song. So if a certain song plays every time that character enters a room, that really helps with their personality and flesh them out to the player. And then last but not least, a specific sidekick can really round out a non-specific avatar. The Zelda series has used this almost to a fault, but some other games use it well. And that is, Link is pretty non-specific. He's towards the non-specific end of the spectrum. And so in a lot of the games, they'll give Link a companion, someone who follows him around, who is not non-specific, who has a very specific personality. In fact, one of Link's best sidekicks is from Twilight Princess. There's sort of this princess, and the story's really about her. She's been deposed from her throne by the bad guy. She's been cast out. She's mischievous and kind of goofy. She's really has a fun personality. And she's trying to get Link to help her to get her throne back and bring her family back from exile. Very powerful story. Link is very non-specific. And yet giving him the specific avatar, Na'vi, the specific sidekick, that's her name, Na'vi, was really effective in that game and really helped create a really good player experience where Link is just Link. He just is Link. He doesn't change. He just is who he is, and he represents you. So that can really help. And so that we have the fairy from Link to the Ocarina of Time on the left there. You also have GLaDOS from the Portal games. If you've never played Portal, oh man, you should go check out the Portal games. Portal games are crazy fun, but you are a non-specific avatar in the Portal games. You don't really have an appearance. I think you are a woman in that game, but the only way you can see yourself is to look through a portal and sort of see your back. And so they give you GLaDOS, and she's your sidekick. And I'm not going to spoil the ending for you, but GLaDOS is a great sidekick, and she's really fun. She's goofy. She has a crazy personality, and she's just really fun as she guides you through the portal levels in the portal world, and even in the sequel when they bring her back. So yeah, she's a non-specific avatar. A specific sidekick can really flesh out a non-specific avatar, and you can, if you do it well, you get the best of both worlds. The player feels like I'm in this game, and the sidekick gives personality and gives character development, tells a good story or brings a good story into it like Navi does or like GLaDOS does. So if you have thoughts or questions, let me know. I look forward to reading about how you're going to design your avatars.